It is true that we got a smaller patch this time. Riot had their summer break. But even in a lighter patch like the one that we're getting, there are still details that are important to changing the meta and changing who is powerful right now. And while it might not shake up everything, it is important to know how things are moving around. That way you're not caught off guard by something coming out of the blue and dominating the game that you're in. Speaking of dominating the game, we have guides to help you do that up on our website that get to go way more in depth than what we can do here on YouTube, so you should definitely check it out. At the very least, make sure you subscribe to the channel, that way you can keep up with all the guides that we release out here for you. And if you learned something from this video, make sure you hit the like button, that way I know it's actually useful for you. As always, for the tier list, I'm going to be going over champions that you guys asked about on our last video, and if you have suggestions for champions for me to explain next time around, make sure you comment those down below. I might not be able to get to everybody, but I'm definitely going to try to squeeze in as many as I can, and if I can't cover every single champion that you guys suggest, well, there's always the next tier list that we put out. While we're here, let's not forget about the rules of the tier list, right? This is framed at Platinum and below, so you're looking at the lower end of the elos. Even though I've explained them multiple times, don't be surprised when you see stuff like Akali and Kai'Sa being very low down on the tier list because they have ridiculously high skill floors that you need to reach to even be somewhat competitive on the champion. That or they're just in a state where everything about them just feels depressing, and they really are way too weak to consider for serious play. Let's start off our 10.17 predictions with the mid lane, and here you might be noticing that like last time, we have Annie, Galio, Fizz, and Swain in the broken tier. However, I'm going to highlight somebody who moved down, and that's Diana. This is directly a result of what I went over in the Broken Strategies video, which you should go watch if you haven't already, because there's a lot of good stuff in there. Diana's problem is that she doesn't have a lot of range. Sure, she has multiple dashes, she can reset using her Q, but she could still be stopped during her dash, and if she can't get to the right targets, she can feel really underwhelming. With the way that the meta's been evolving and certain champions being buffed, that is something that happens to Diana a lot more often. And it's why, out of the other people who are in the broken tier, she has been suffering the most. Enough to the point where I think that on next patch, she is worthy of being rated as S tier and not broken. And while we're in the S tier, it's worth to highlight Lux, who is a champion that can do exactly what Diana does not want to experience. Lux has the ability to zone out Diana with slows and CCs, and even if she does get on top of the Lux, it can be incredibly difficult to kill her through her massive shielding. Diana doesn't quite have the edge that she used to have, but she does still have one, so she is not by any means a bad pick. The A tier holds a new face. Yone has been out for enough now that we have a good idea of where he should fit, and knowing that he's getting nerfs on the upcoming patch, it definitely seems like he's going to land solidly in the A tier. Yone's whole deal is that once he gets out of lane, he actually is insanely broken. He does a ton of damage, and he's really hard to kill. By dialing back some of the constant damage in his Qs, and also removing the ability for his Art of Lifesteal, it does make him a lot easier to kill. It does touch his damage at least a little bit. Kind of fitting that Yasuo and Yone are both in the same tier. It's almost like Riot has had some experience balancing a champion like Yone. I wonder why that is. We'll take a little jump down to C tier now and highlight two champions here. First up, Sylas. Sylas has been in an interesting spot. He definitely has carry potential. It's just a bit of a struggle to get there, especially in the mid lane, when he's up against things like you see at the top of the tier list. There's been a little bit of innovation on him with taking Fleet Footwork over Conqueror, but even that doesn't really seem to be bringing him into a position where he deserves to be anywhere outside of C tier. He might be B tier worthy, it's really close. And if he does actually end up performing towards the more average side of the spectrum rather than below average, well, I wouldn't be too surprised, and you shouldn't be either. The other champion that I'm highlighting here is Twisted Fate, and he is somebody who definitely has suffered from the nerfs that came to him recently. Before, he was a solid middle-of-the-pack mid laner. He was pretty safe, and he could lane into a lot of things. But with the recent nerf to his W, it actually has been a problem for him a lot of the time. TF can still have those big moments where he gets the ulti around the map, have a ton of impact, snowball, get good farm, and just completely take over the game on his own by the fact of his global presence. The problem is that now he's having trouble getting to that point in the first place. Nerfing his W early on does make it tough, and it's not even the ability that he maxes first, meaning that the nerfs continue to plague him even towards the middle stages of the game, until he actually hits level 13. And that's a significant chunk of the game where you aren't performing where you used to be. And that's exactly why Twisted Fate isn't where he used to be in our mid lane tier list. That's all I'm going to highlight for the mid lane though. We've spent enough time here already. Let's move up to top lane and start talking about what's going on up there. Urgot and Shen are still dominating in the broken tier. There really isn't a reason for them to not still be broken, as most of the other champions that were up and coming are getting nerfed, and the buffs to other ones aren't going to completely nullify the fact that these champions exist and are already strong. That should not be changing at all going into the next patch, so don't expect any surprises there. Something that I definitely missed last patch though was just how much impact the Hecarim changes had. Hecarim was already a very solid top laner, and I thought that he would stay right around the A tier even after the buffs that he received. But boy, was I wrong. If I can go back and change things, I would 100% go back and predict that Hecarim would be in the broken tier on 10.16. Unfortunately, I missed the mark a little bit by rating him in A tier. Hecarim is one of the champions that is getting touched on the small patch that Riot is doing, and so I don't think he's going to quite remain there when he loses the movement speed on his E. He is, however, going to be an S tier champion at the very least. Before his buffs, I would have considered him a mid A tier champion. After him, I would have considered him a high A tier champion. The fact that he's still going to be even stronger than what he was before means that he really only has one place left to fit in the S tier. On the opposite side of things, Garen and Volibear moved down into the A tier from S tier, as they are champions who do suffer from the short range and soft engage problems, which in the mid lane Diana suffers from, and also I went over in the Broken Strategies video. If you're a bit confused as to why they would move down, then you should definitely go check that out, because I give an in-depth explanation there of what exactly I mean. Now, I'm only going to highlight one more champion here in B tier, and that's because it's going to take a little bit of time. I would do a few more normally, but a lot of you guys were talking about this on the last video. Some of you were on one side, a lot of you guys were on the other. I'm talking about us rating Darius in the B tier. Yes, he is a B tier champion. He is not as strong as you might think. And I say think for a reason. I'm not going to give you a 2,000 word double-spaced Times New Roman 12-point font essay on why Darius is a B tier champion. What I am going to do is give you examples of other champions in other roles that basically have the same numbers as Darius, but you are going to feel completely different about them. A lot of comments last time were bringing up stuff like ban rate, he feels super strong, why is his ban rate so high, he should be really strong because of that. Other tier lists rate him really high. Whatever the reason or lack thereof that was given, every single thing boiled down to a couple of the same points. And that's why this comparison is going to be a really good way to show you exactly what I mean. Let's start with mid lane, with the most notorious champion in existence, Yasuo. He's got a pretty much dead even 50% win rate and has had one for a very long time. And he's been consistently considered better in the bot lane. Only recently did he get a nerf, which changed that and made things a lot more close. And in case you're curious, his bot lane win rate is something like 50.5, so it isn't very far off. We are talking about snowball potential, the ban rate of a champion, their performance in the past over time and how they haven't really gotten nerfs, buffs to other things in terms of items and runes, their pick rate being absurdly high, higher than pretty much anything else in that given role, and all of this stuff. And you in the same sentence say, the Darius is broken tier and Yasuo is not. You are just wrong by the same standards that you hold a champion to. Their win rate, pick rate, and ban rate are almost all the same. It's very close. What's the difference in that equation? Your feelings. And hey, I do this too. You know who I hate? I hate Kha'Zix. That champion is disgusting. When I saw him get a buff, I was like, why? Riot, we want this champion removed. All junglers hate this champion. All junglers might be referring to me, but all junglers still hate this champion. I banned it in every game I play, but do I recognize that objectively, he actually isn't all that broken, except when he actually got that buff? Yeah, okay, so I'm not rating him in the broken tier because of the bad experiences I've had with the champion. When you're looking at the state of the meta, the hundreds of thousands upon millions of games that are played on a given champion, their difficulty, how they interact with the other popular lane matchups, and all this other stuff, that's how you place a champion. Not by pulling up some of their statistics and then applying your own biases to it. And I hope you're not ready for the rodeo to end because like I said, I have several examples, so let's get down to business. Let's move on to support. Morgana. 33% ban rate. Sure, it ain't no 48% that Darius holds, but you know what her win rate is? Better than Darius's for the past 6 patches in a row. Does that mean for any given reason that she should be encroaching upon the broken tier? No. And this is the example that should seem the most ridiculous to you, because I am comparing Darius to support Morgana. And if you recognize that that is absolutely beyond delusional to even make a comparison in the first place, then how do you not understand that the numbers that Darius has don't actually translate to him being broken when actually analyzed correctly. Just because he has a particularly large number in some stat, or because somebody else says he has, or whatever reason you come up with, those don't actually make him broken. Alright, I feel like I spent way too long on that, but it is what it is. It needs to be out there. The information needs to be sent to the right ears. Wait, do I want to mention guarantee? No, I can't. We gotta move on. We're going into the jungle. We're talking about the Bush Boys. I'm getting hung up on this. Let's go. Despite the patch being pretty small, jungle's still seen some pretty good shaking up. In the S tier, there are a lot of champions, and there were last time, but there's even more this time. That's because some people have moved up and some people have moved down. You'll notice that in the broken tier, I'm putting Fiddlesticks in, but honestly, the state of the jungle has been pretty much fantastic. And the reason I know that is because it's very, very difficult to discern who exactly is going to be the de facto best jungler. When you have all these options offhand that are really, really good, that just speaks to the overall health of the role in general. I do think that Fiddlesticks will edge out here, but not by much. And I really wouldn't be surprised to see somebody like Evelynn or even Kayn take over. Speaking of Evelynn, she moved up into the S tier, and I did misjudge her a little bit last time from the buff that she got. Her Q going to a static cooldown rather than being reduced when she hit monsters dramatically improved her fighting, and I already knew that was going to happen, but it had way more effects than I thought it would. She was, however, being kept down a little bit by Hecarim, who also moves up to S tier in this prediction tier list, and that's because I also misjudged him. He was punching way above the weight I thought he would get, definitely being who should have been in broken tier last time. In a little bit of a switch up, I'm going to highlight Nocturne here, who's in the A tier, as I'm moving him down from S to A. While the continued changes to Nocturne's passive definitely do help him out in the jungle quite a bit, it wasn't quite to the point where he's deserving of S tier. To be fair, that is because there are a lot of other champions who are becoming a bit of a problem for him, like Hecarim when he was really, really strong on the past patch, or something like Kha'Zix when he got buffed, but we'll see if that actually changes. I don't think it will this time around. But the other highlight that I'm going to give an A tier here is on the opposite side of the spectrum. Elise is moving back into A tier. And that's due to a bunch of meta shifting that's going on. If you checked out the mid and top lane list, then you already know what I'm talking about. The short range, soft engaged champions are not in a good spot. And somebody like Elise who can capitalize on that big time is going to get a little bit of a bump in performance because of it. Just be careful that you aren't running headfirst into a Nunu snowball or a Zac rushing an adaptive helm, because that could be a pretty big problem. There really isn't too much else that's particularly notable about the tier list changing in the jungle, so let's move on to AD carry now as we talk about the bot lane as a whole. I guess Riot thinks it's in a good spot, or maybe they're trying to wait off a little bit until after Worlds for some big changes, because frankly, there isn't much difference here compared to last time, and there really aren't that many changes, at least changes that are significant enough to actually push a champion up or maybe even down into a different tier. Broken tier houses Caitlyn, and that's for a good reason. Last patch, when she got her buffs, she was really hitting heavy. And even though they're taking off the 5 movement speed that they gave her, they aren't completely reverting her buffs. The fact of the matter is that Caitlyn only needed a tiny bit to really stand out from the rest of the crowd and pretty much crush all the rest of the competition. There were a few who could potentially stand up to her, but for the most part, it was basically just Caitlyn on top by a landslide. And keep in mind, this has been through the entirety of the time that Lux-Sona combo bot lane, where they both run Guardian, has been absolutely tearing it up. If you have no idea what I'm talking about there, go check out the Broken Strategies video, because I still mention it and why it's also still going to be a problem. Ignoring those, there's only a handful of other changes in the bot lane, and I'll list them off here because they're really unimpressive. Varus gets a bonus attack speed per level of 0.75%, Xayah gets some extra AD per level, and Kai'Sa gets some extra AD per level, as well as the attack speed back on her E. That's all the bot lane changes. Caitlyn does not struggle against any of those champions. I'm really not convinced with the fact that the support meta isn't really going to change, and that the AD carries are the way that they are, that Caitlyn is going to be pushed down to the point where she no longer deserves to be in broken tier. While she might not dominate as hard as she is right now, because she will lose a little bit of mobility, that doesn't mean she isn't dominating in the first place. In the middle of Caitlyn's reign, there's been some interesting things cropping up along the way though, so let me talk about an A tier highlight, and that's a new placement here of Ziggs. Even during Caitlyn's oppression, Ziggs has proven himself to be a candidate for the bottom lane in more ways than one. He does offer really good range and the ability to farm pretty safely, and he's also got insane tower pushing potential. He even gets to a point where he can repeatedly deal damage to people at ranges that they normally can't answer. And now, let me flip all that on you and say, doesn't that kind of sound like I could be describing Caitlyn? Long range, ability to poke, farm safely, has insane pushing power and tower destruction. The bullet points are all pretty much there, and that's actually why he's kind of risen out of nowhere. The small change to his passive and his natural ability to deal with somebody like Caitlyn has made him a very solid pick, and he does have synergy with some of the supports that are around as well. Anybody who can make anybody stand still for an extended period of time is one of Ziggs' best friends, that's for sure. Even if you're just trying to keep him alive and safe, there are plenty of supports that can do that for Ziggs right now. That's why he's having no problem. There's a couple other quick moves that I'll mention here on the tier list in AD carry, but nothing else is too detailed to really go into. Oddly enough, Draven seemed to be doing a bit better on this patch, and I do think he'll continue to do better, because there are a lot of other AD carries that he can actually oppress, much like Caitlyn. And of course, Draven is all about snowballing an early lead. Even though he really can't usually do that against Caitlyn, you could always just ban her and then, kill everybody else that exists in the bot lane, I guess. Those everybody else's would be Heimerdinger, Misfortune, and Varus, who all found themselves moving either up or down into the B tier. These champions are definitely hitting a lot more towards their average, and in Varus's case, I do think that the attack speed buff will make him move up from C tier. While Lethality Varus might not be in the picture anymore, the DPS lethal tempo oriented Varus will be in a better spot because of this. Overall, Varus is a champion who's pretty borderline, so it shouldn't be surprising to see him move up. He's been really kind of needing something for a while now. The last thing we'll leave the AD carry tier list with is something that many of you probably did not see coming at all. And that's Kai'Sa moving out of the D tier. I've given Kai'Sa a lot of flack lately, but giving her extra attack damage per level and a ton of attack speed on her E, that's something that could get me thinking. Now, it's not going to be a huge change, but it definitely does impact her in the mid game and most certainly will in the late game. Does that justify a really big jump in terms of where I should place her? No. Does she move up a tier? Yeah, I think she does. Maybe by the end of the patch, my mind has changed a little bit and she really isn't standing out more than I thought she would, but we'll only have to see. At that point, she would simply be joining Syndra back in the D tier again the next time we talk about tier lists. Now, the very last thing for today is to talk about support, and this one, just like AD carry, really isn't seeing too much going around here. Let me hit the movement that happened for you so you really understand where things are going, but it seems like Riot is kind of content with where bot lane is, or they're just waiting for Worlds or something like that, like I mentioned in the AD carry tier list. S tier's got a lot of champions, that's for sure. That's pretty obvious. It's probably the most populated S tier out of any of the other roles. And that's for a good reason. All of these champions are pretty solid. The only one who's really iffy is Maokai, and that's because Maokai's strengths do lie in his ability to engage. However, it's not only his W that can allow him to engage, his R is a good tool for that. And that's why he doesn't suffer quite the same way as opposed to other people who might be suffering from the short range soft engage issue, which I've gone over a couple times already in this video and the other tier lists, and also went over in the Broken Strategies video. The reason why I'm throwing Taric into the Broken tier is because pretty much half of the S tier could be a Broken tier pick. Taric is the one who has been very consistent though. He's been rock steady in terms of his performance, his pick rate, and even his ban rate, which is something that you don't usually see for an extended period of time, especially when the champion has gotten a nerf. All the stuff kind of pulling together, and the fact that he's not the most complex champion and he has a decent amount of power in the laning phase brings me to believe that he's going to be really solid going into the next patch as a Broken tier contender. Meta permitting, maybe something like Swain or even Lulu would have been more fitting, but only time will tell. Since survivability and utility is kinda at a premium, Taric stands out as the obvious choice. Knight's Vow, Locket, Zeke's, his ultimate, his W, all of his Q healing, the fact that he has a stun, all this stuff adds up and makes him absolutely fantastic. Maokai and Sona moved down from the Broken tier, and while I've already spoken about Maokai, in terms of Sona, her nerfs to her Q and her E will impact her laning phase as well as some of her scaling, which when combined with the fact that some of Sona's performance in the support position has to be attributed to the Lux-Sona bot lane combo, that she isn't really going to be deserving the Broken tier spot anymore. Even though she was performing to a Broken degree level on her own, taking away some of the power in the combo and some of her power on her own seems a bit weird and like a really dumb change. Because Sona Lux may very well still be absolutely broken, but Sona on her own might not be as strong as she was. Is that what they're going for? Well, if she's broken, I would say so. They do deserve a nerf. Leona also moves down into the A tier and Lux moves up into the A tier, and these two champions should be a no-brainer if you think about it for even just a second. Leona has been a really reliable engaging champion for a long time now, but when you're talking about extreme defensive survivability to the point where you got like Taric, Lulu, Sona, Zillion, Nami, Soraka, all these champions in the very high echelons of the tier list and performances, you're really going to have a tough time standing out as Leona, because it can be really, really difficult to get on them, and even more difficult to actually get a kill. While there is still some hilarious potential for Leona to 1v1 AD carries in the middle stages of the game, later on it's probably not advisable for you to try that out. Nautilus moves down from B tier to C tier, and that's because ever since he got his nerfs, and hasn't really gotten any compensation to help him out since then, as the support meta has evolved, and required people to be more specialized instead of generic, like Nautilus's kit really leads him to be, he's kind of fallen by the wayside. He kind of suffers from the similar problem of Thresh and why Thresh moved down in the past, but Thresh has even more tools available to him that Nautilus never has had, and so that's why he isn't quite doing that poorly compared to Nautilus. And just to make sure we're covering everything, because why not, Karma moves down into D tier. I thought she would be C tier last time because she did get the nerfs to her Q, and that really sucks for Karma across all roles, not even just support. But it hit her even harder than I thought it would in support, and that sucks. Even the more strictly supportive supports like a Soraka can offer what Karma does right now, with more whipped cream and a cherry on top to go with it. With that though, we've wrapped up every single tier list for 10.17, so please make sure you drop your thoughts and the champions that you want highlighted next time in the comments. And as always, my name is Ace Windstorm, and I will see you all later.